Welcome to the Boomer Briefing Podcast, where we help you solve a critical business issue in 20 minutes or less. I'm your host, Jon Hubbard, shareholder and consultant here at Boomer Consulting. And with me today is our CEO, Jim Boomer. Jim, thanks for being on this episode.
You bet, John. It's always great to be here. I look forward to these conversations.
And you work with firms, as most of our listeners know, in the areas of leadership, technology, you even get into some talent, growth, process, kind of all over the board. And one big topic that is not new by any means, but it's still a really large topic in our profession and seems to be evolving over time, is around advisory and consulting services. And really, I think it's fair for us to say, Jim, that a lot of accountants find this topic scary, right? Kind of moving to true advisory, true consulting. And because it's scary, they don't move as quickly toward it, or maybe they're still wanting to learn more about it before they actually make that transition. So that's going to be the topic for our conversation today, Jim. And one thing that I think would be really helpful as we begin this conversation is actually defining advisory and consulting services. We find the more firms we work with, the more definitions arise around this. So how would you define advisory services? How would you define consulting services?
Well, I think it's a great question, but also an important one. And although you didn't specifically ask me in your question, I think it's important to kind of start with the compliance and transactional services. So, these are the things that I'm pretty sure our audience will know well. Those are the bread and butter services that historically have made the firm so successful. Tax, audit, the client, the accounting services, keeping the books, doing payroll. These are the things really that your clients have to have, or I'd say what they need. But as you move into advisory and consulting, we get into services that clients want, and frankly, they value more than what they have to have. So not to minimize the compliance and transactional, because they have to have those and they're important. But when you think about a business owner, the things that they want are more the now and the future. And that's where we get into advisory and consulting. So I define advisory services as, those things that stay primarily focused in the financial realm of the business. I consider them business performance services that go beyond sort of looking backwards and after the fact accounting to start to look at the now and the future, to analyze the numbers, provide guidance on what are some of the levers you could pull to improve your business. Some examples would be things like outsourced CFO, where you're not just doing the accounting, but you're actually giving advice and advising them. Wealth management, benchmarking, those kind of things. When you get into consulting, this is where you start to focus more on the strategic aspects of your client's business. So things like strategic planning, succession planning, which John, you and I talked about on another episode, and overall transformation of their business models. We talk a lot about transformation within this profession of accounting firms, but all those firms' clients are also going through a transformation where they're going to need guidance and a trusted partner to help move them along. So, the skills required are different in consulting in terms of communication. Yes, you have to have it throughout, but it's a different level of communication in consulting, and it's a different. I think we'll get into this later, but it's a different way of how you communicate with your clients. Collaboration is different. Your mindset around that, both internally with your team, thinking it as a team sport, but also thinking of your client as being on your team, and they need to be a collaborative piece of it. Skills around simplicity and taking complexity and making it simple. And then finally, shifting from answering questions and always having to be 100% right to actually asking the right questions. So from a high level, that's how I define advisory and consulting.
Yeah, and that's really helpful, the fact that you included the transactional and the compliance in your answer as well, because I think kind of seeing all three of those types of services side by side in your definition is really helpful. And one thing you said was not to minimize transactional and compliance, and that's always been the case, is not to minimize it. And for those, for those listening out there, something we always say as we work with firms in this area is, if you love working in that transactional and that compliance area, those services, the value of those become maximized or increased as you couple that with advisory and consulting. And I think that's such a unique competitive advantage our profession has around these types of services, is the ability to kind of provide all three. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that later. But as you know, as Jim, we kind of started this conversation with the fact that this move is a little scary, right? Why do you think that is? Why do you think our profession, and I think I can speak for both of us when I say we probably haven't moved as quickly as we would have liked our profession to move. We really haven't seen that in this space here. Why do you think there's still some hesitation out there, or firms or individuals find this move to be a little scary?
Well, I mean, I think the main thing is it's a whole new frontier for most accountants. Like when they hear about doing strategic planning, succession planning, or even getting beyond the backward looking transact, that is new. And so when they hear about that, and emotions will range from very excited to, I may not have the skills today, but I'm excited to go develop those and move into this, to scared sighted, I'll call it. That's somewhere in the middle, like this terrifies me, but I want to do this, or I feel like this would be good for my career to do this, to absolutely no interest in moving to advisory and consulting services. Like people, there's individuals, and rightfully so, that know their unique ability and say, I am highly skilled, I'm passionate about compliance and transactional. That's okay. But I think that's the reason is, we'll go back to, I use the word clients, or the phrase clients value more the advisory and consulting. I think it's important to clarify, when I talk about that, that's more from an emotional level, buyer decision-making perspective. Not that there's not value in the work that you're doing, because it does, going back to minimizing, and why I said that is because when it at first glance, it sounds like that. But if you think about the person who's writing the check, it's what's motivating them. And like Simon Sinek talks about, the why, and getting to that emotional level. Yeah, I mean, my taxes being done, I may not having to mess with that, is highly valuable to me, but it's not what I get excited about and emotional about. It's about how I can, continue to be strategic about growing the business. So the other area I'd say that makes it scary is it's a big mindset shift from, and I alluded to this quickly earlier, but from having all the answers and walking in and being looked at as the smartest person in the room when you're talking about tax, or you're delivering the audit report, or you're talking about the financial statements, and you're the smartest person, but you also have to be right. You have to tie out to every penny and be the expert who has all the answers or have all the right answers. And you have to shift your mindset to being still an expert in your field, but you're playing more the role of a guide who doesn't necessarily answer all the right, or answer the questions, but ask the right questions. And so, and the difference there is transactional and compliance is based on really agreed upon written rules. But advisory and consulting gets into a much more gray area where there isn't often a right or wrong answer. And you have to help the client figure out, find their way for them to discover what the right or wrong answer is. So that is a scary area. And I think we're going to talk about some of the things that can help them overcome that, right, Jon?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think acknowledging some of the things you said around why it's scary is super important because, sometimes how this topic is discussed in our profession is, in a way or with the tone that, oh, it's easy, just do it. Right. And it's really not. I mean, because you know, of the components you just outlined. So um, as you as you work with firms in this area, Jim, what are some of the recommendations you have for them? What are some of the tips, the strategies you help coach firms through as they really look to move beyond just the transactional and compliance services and into advisory and consulting?
Well, I think that the most important thing is really to recognize that this is an and proposition, not or, because all the talk about advisory consulting and even where we started, it starts to sound like, oh, that's the future, that's the most valuable, that's the most important. That's probably where the most tremendous growth opportunity is for a lot of firms, but that doesn't mean that you're not gonna that compliance and transactional services go away. So you're gonna end up doing both, and there's gonna continue to be that need in the market. But the key is to really assess your team's unique abilities, their desires, and put them in the right role. And I guess if I back up, you've got to define what are those level of services that fall into the transactional, compliance, transactional, advisory, and consulting, and really define what does that involve. That'll start to drive what are the skills that you need, and then you can put people in the right seats. I think that's number one. If you go through and create some structure out of this unknown and what is really chaos right now for a lot of firms, it'll help people with that fear. Second, and I say this with most topics, but it's because I believe it so much. I mean, you have to get help outside of your own four walls. Join a peer group. And again, I sound like a broken record, but we participate in peer groups because we see the value in it. It can help you connect with people that are in the same situation, are on the journey of on this path. So that would be number one that I think will help with your fear. Knowing that you're not the only one dealing with this and struggling with this is tremendously valuable in and of itself. Now you have somebody that you can go together to collaborate on how do we move past this fear. I think the second thing I'd say that can help you tremendously is we often look at our technology partners as they want to sell me more, which is true. That's what they're in business for. But I think there's a lot of capabilities and services that your technology partners have that firms aren't even aware exists that can truly make them more of a strategic partner to help guide you, because your goals are aligned. I mean, if you grow advisory and consulting, that's going to often grow their sales of their software and tools. And if they can get you on their software and tools, if it's the right ones, they believe that they can help you move the needle as well. So I think with aligned goals, looking at them as strategic partners, and we've talked about this for years, is an important piece of that, and can also give you insight from other organizations that they've worked with, whether they're accounting firms or other businesses. All of those will help to start to ease the fear.
So, Jim, I want to ask you a question off the cuff here a little bit, because as you were walking through that, which is really helpful, by the way, it reminded me of a conversation I was having with a firm just a few weeks ago. And so here's the question. Is it essential or is it necessary in order to be a consultant in a firm, that you have to have decades and decades of technical experience to do that. Because I think how some firms we've seen view uh, transactional and compliance services, advisory, services, and then consulting services as almost like a ladder, right? That you have to kind of go through each toll gate in order to get to the next. And I think we have a different perspective than that on that. But I want to hear yours. Can someone be a consultant without having all the technical expertise that others may have in the firm?
I'm going to give you my consultant answer. It depends. I mean, it depends on the service. So if you think about your advisory and consulting services, I do think you need some people that have the expertise and the experience in the businesses that you're advising and consulting to. And that is why you'll hear endless consultants and thought leaders talking about the need to focus on specific verticals and niches. It's very hard to be and have expertise in everything, but if you have 3 to 5 verticals, you can truly become an expert. So I think there's a need for that, but there's other services that if you define a process and it's truly facilitating and guiding and you are playing with the role that I said earlier, that it's about asking the right questions, not being the smartest person in the room and answering every question 100% right. Those definitely don't need to be people with 20, 30 years of experience. And I'll go back to where I started my career with Arthur Andersen. That's the whole concept of the large consulting practices. They send a ton of 20-somethings out in the Fortune 500 as consultants who have been trained in how to communicate, how to ask questions, how to do that sort of work and deliver value to the clients. And it's not necessary to have years and years of experience. Now, there's other services where you're really getting into specifics of that business that you probably do need to have some experience to leverage on. So I think having a both is critical, but to become an advisor and consultant, you don't need to wait till you're 30 years deep into your career to do that.
Yep. Agreed, Jim. That was really good answer there to that. So as we kind of wrap up our conversation for this episode, what's the next step someone should take? Right, this can be a scary topic, right? As we've talked about, kind of making this move. What are 1 or 2 pieces of advice you would have for next steps?
That's a common question, especially when it's new frontier was the term I used. And where do I start? What's my first step? And I would say that, this truly is a transformation in the accounting firms today. And so a shift like this, you have to have a strategic plan and a vision. A lot of firms just want to jump into, okay, the answer is I move all my accounting clients over from desktop to online software. Now I'm doing advisory service. No, you need to really step back and say, how are we gonna do this? What's our vision for what we want our CAS practice to look like, and what is the plan to get there? So whether you were to use Boomer Consulting to help you, or you use someone else in the profession that can guide you, there's a lot of people out there that can provide you guidance and facilitate. Or if you do it on your own, I mean, that's step number 1, do it. Paint the picture of the vision of what you want for your firm's growth in this area, what it's going to look like, and that'll start to drive the other steps. But I mentioned, your technology partners earlier, but them and others are offering, low cost or even no cost workshops to really give you that kickstart to start your progress. And some of these we have been involved in, others we're not, But much like my advice to do a strategic plan, whether we're involved in them or not, do it. Like, doing something takes the first step and creates the momentum to get you moving forward. If you just wait till you have all the answers, then it's truly the paralysis by analysis. And then finally, I'm going to go back to my one true love in terms of what you can do, and that's peer groups that I talked about earlier. And we've created a business transformation circle that's laser focused on both the digital and the business transformation necessary to streamline your transactional compliance services, but also grow your advisory and consulting. So please reach out to our team if you'd like to learn more about that group. But like I said before, if it's not that group, find another group that you can get your leadership in to start to move the needle.
Well, it's such good advice. And the reason it's your one true love, as you said, is because it's just so incredibly helpful to be able to sit across the table from someone else that's in a firm like yours, maybe in a similar situation, and hear from them on how they've experienced, success and, their challenges and, just all those conversations that happen, which one is why the group exists to begin with, is to have those types of conversations. But we've, Jim, you and I have been in peer groups together over the years outside of our profession, and we leave there with just so many helpful, good ideas and know that we can move them forward and not have to recreate the wheel on our own or start from scratch. And, it's one or two conversations that, can happen at these meetings that just have exponential value. And so I second.
I do want to clarify. I
Sure.
said my one true love in terms of next steps, just in case my wife listens to it.
Yeah. Let's definitely clarify that. So yes. All right. For those listening, thank you so much for tuning in. We just wrapped up our 50th episode. Just a few episodes back. So we're in 50 something right now. And we just appreciate all the, all the downloads, all the listens. If you like these types of topics, please subscribe to our podcast. That way you get notified every Tuesday morning when they are released every week. We kind of change up the topic. Sometimes it's on growth. It'll be on process or technology next week. Or talent, and kind of everything in between. So please subscribe to the podcast, and thanks so much for listening. And thanks, Jim, for a great conversation.
Thanks, John.